Welcome back. This is the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always by my co-host Nick Falato. Tonight we're doing the podcast meets YouTube again. It's Big Blue Banter on YouTube. Tonight we will be breaking down my current and personal 5-step blueprint for the perfect New York Giants football draft. Hopefully I can get myself centered and collected and stop squirming around here as I get used to being on camera. But this is my 5-step blueprint for what I think would be a perfect Giants draft. Before I dive into that, what we're going to do is I'll go over each step, then we'll talk it through with you, me and Nick. We'll see where we both stand on it. Before I do that, though, I do want to go over my 7-step perfect blueprint last draft and see how it actually played out, because that's interesting to me. Now, 7 steps last year, 5 steps this year. Why the difference? Because last year I felt like they had more to accomplish, and it would take a more complicated plan for them to kind of get it done. So last year, my first step was attempt to acquire more draft capital via trade. I talked about the spots they can do it at 4. It didn't actually happen, so 0 for 1. The second one was be patient but prudent about drafting a wide receiver. Didn't actually happen. They were patient.
Wasn't a great start.
They were prudent. I'm 0 for 2. But then I start to hit. Add athleticism and speed to the off-ball linebacker spot. They did it with Tate Crowder. They did it with Cam Brown. They, to some extent, Carter Coughlin. I mean, it's unexpected ways. They didn't go high in the draft, but I talked about in this write-up some of those later round guys that I did like. Step 4, prioritize getting stronger on the offensive line. Well, they did just that.
By a lot, too. I mean,
yes.
Think about it. Andrew Thomas, Matt Pear, and Shane Lemieux. That's 3.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Step 4 was prioritize getting stronger on the interior offensive line, which I think they did with Shane Lemieux. He's a very strong player.
Yes.
So, sorry, a little bit. And then, step 5, don't skip out on this talented and deep offensive tackle class, which obviously they didn't do. Step 6, don't force it with an edge player in a weak edge class. They didn't do that either. And step 7, don't neglect finding a safety you can trust in single high looks. Xavier McKinney. Yeah. They did that. So, and obviously we didn't see it as much in year 1, but we'll see that a lot more in year 2, I think, with him in the single high look. So, hopefully they can, adhere to this plan next year or this draft, because I like it. I think it worked out. So my first step in my 5-step plan for 2021 is step 1, take a blue chip prospect at number 11 overall. I talk about how I would take a BPA approach, and the names I listed that I think should or could be available are LSU wide receiver Jamar Chase, wide receiver Devontae Smith from Alabama, Alabama wide receiver Jalen Waddle, who I wrote in parentheses, most likely to be available. And I wrote Jamar Chase, least likely to be available. Florida tight end Kyle Pitts, Oregon tackle Penei Sewell, and Northwestern tackle / guard / whatever you want to play him at, 'cause I'm sure he played all 5 positions, Rashawn Slater. So that's 6 names I consider blue chips that could or should be available in order of least likely to be available to most likely to be available, with Chase being least, Sewell being the second least, Pitts, Slater, Devontae Smith, and then Jalen Waddle. So I said there will be temptation to draft an edge at 11, but I would avoid that for blue chip. Where do you stand on step 1 of this plan?
I think it's a necessary plan, and I know you and I both don't want the Giants to really reach at the edge position, but there's one player that does cross my mind that you and I have kind of soured on just from stuff that we hear. Whether it's BS or not, we can't really tell, but it's Micah Parsons, who is a blue chip type player at a position of value that's not as high as some of these other positions, wide receiver, especially the offensive line. So what do you feel? Where do you feel Micah Parsons kind of fits into this? Is it the character concerns that's really holding you back from kind of putting him with these other blue chips? Because the impact he can have is high against Patrick Graham's defense, and really in any defense if his head's on straight.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Nick. I think as we kind of worked our way through this process, like if you asked us 3 weeks ago, he was probably on our short list, or at least on my short list, wish list. He would never not be mentioned on a list like this of guys I name out. For me, it's probably a combination of 2 things. One, some things I'm hearing on him that would kind of have to have like a handler type person, which you just don't want, especially after the Odell Beckham situation. I really think that it's important to avoid having another Odell Beckham on this team, no matter how talented that player may be. You can't have a player who has his own set of rules. There has to be. I know some Giants fans who toe the line with Odell Beckham and will ride and die with him till the end, and I respect that. I really do. He was a great player when healthy. But I was in those locker rooms at times, and he had his own, especially at training camp, he had his own set of rules. He really did. You couldn't get around him for interviews. You were lucky to get Odell Beckham to speak to you, and everybody treated him different in practice. He kind of had his own set of rules, not only with the media, but with the players and the coaches, because of how high his star power was. And I don't think you can I think it's a dangerous game to play when you have players like that who have their own set of rules on the team, unless they're a quarterback. And then, like Tom Brady, I'm sure, has his own set of rules in Tampa. That's fine. It's Tom Brady. But Odell Beckham wasn't making that kind of impact. I'm not sure Parsons is. So it's a combination of that. And then for me, it's what you mentioned at the end. I'm starting to think more about this holistically. And it's the fact of the position he plays. How important is that? And what's the upside to getting a player like that at 11? The upside is if he can be a force off the edge as an edge rusher on some passing downs or on a lot of passing downs, then it's super high. Then he's worth it to me. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think that's a guarantee or a lock. Can he also be elite in pass coverage, both in zone and man? We've seen him do it in man at Penn State, but that's against Big Ten tight ends. That's against Big Ten, backs in space. These aren't NFL level. Big Ten is known for having slow-footed tight ends. Big Ten is known for kind of the same way not having all those great elusive receiving backs and route running receiving backs. So that scares me a little bit because if he can't be a force as a pass coverage linebacker or as a pass rushing linebacker, I don't know if there's so much value for him right now on this team with Blake Martinez already on the roster. So I would say it's a combination of those two things for me with Micah.
Also the fact that the Giants invested a lot into the linebacker position last year with Cam Brown, Carter Coughlin to a lesser extent, Tay Crowder, they even added T.J. Brunson. So I just, you look at the other needs on this team and you might look away from an off-ball linebacker. Although I may be a little higher than you on this. I think he could impact as not an edge rusher, but just those 5-man pressure packages. We saw Patrick Graham bring them a lot from a lot of different areas. I think he would be just nasty and disgusting on those. But you look at some of the other players that you named, Dan, and I can see why you would have him over Micah Parsons. I would too. I mean, Jamar Chase, like you said, unlikely, but just a really, really good wide receiver. A lot of people who really study and break down wide receiver film over the year have Jamar Chase as the best wide receiver coming out since Julio Jones, which is kind of absolutely ridiculous to think about. But if he had that 2019 season in 2020, people might not forget it. I know that sounds really simple, but it kind of ends up going like that sometimes. But opting out, there's a cost to that, and Penei Sewell knows very well about that, and I hope that cost slides him down to the 11th pick, because that would be delightful for New York Giants fans, for all of us. And I just love all of these other guys on the list, and they're on my list as well for players that I hope the Giants target at 11. Kyle Pitts, Florida, or Sullivan Slater, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle. I'd be happy with either.
Yeah, and then back to Chase. I mean, it's not just the film guys. The analytics. We had Scott Barrett on the podcast last week. He said, according to his model, just from a stats-based model, and this is based on stats, it's based on, I believe, a lot of testing and everything like that. It's all factored into a model. He's the best receiver prospect since 2015, so that's high. And there is the weird, I think out of all the guys, like, let's say, Sewell, Pitts, and Chase, the three unlikeliest that we would love to get at 11. I actually think Chase has the best chance to be there at 11, not because he's not the best player, because if it's always weird in the drafts. Like last year, some team took Henry Ruggs over CeeDee Lamb. I had CeeDee Lamb as my number one receiver. We talked about that I didn't even think it was an option. I didn't think anyone was even close to him. He had DeAndre Hopkins like ball skills in the air, and when you watched him eliminate angles and just his post catchability on tape, and then you watch Ruggs, you're like, these two aren't the same. I know Ruggs had the deep speed, but the point is, some team took Ruggs over him. So I think some team took John Ross one year as the first receiver, right?
He was actually
off the board.
Third.
He was. It was that
Corey Davis and Mike Williams. That was like
Corey Davis, Mike Williams, and John Ross. But they took John Ross over a lot of players at that position.
They took him at 9.
I wasn't expecting. Right. So teams can fall in love with different kinds of wide receiver prospects based on the system they run, what they want to get out of their offense. So it would shock me. Again, I've maintained this entire time. I don't think as many of these receivers are going off the board as people think. You look at the top of this draft, the Broncos, no shot in my mind. Not after going with Hamler and Judy. The Cowboys, no shot in my mind. Not with what they had the receiver position.
The interesting thing about the Cowboys, though, is I kind of can see them going Kyle Pitts and just all Big 12 offense, baby. We got to score 45 to win every game, man.
I can't even imagine that offense with Kyle Pitts. Let's hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, so these would be my guys there. And it is interesting with Micah. If you could convince me, if you're convinced that he can be, and I think you're right, with Patrick Graham's defense versus other defenses, I am more optimistic about if you add him, what he can add as a pass rusher.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, Patrick Graham likes to bring pressure in different packages from different angles, and just you can have him with that A-gap pressure. You can have him in different spots, maybe to kind of generate pressure, or at least to kind of impact the passing play in one way or another, because he is such a force moving downhill. But he would also, for me, have to be good in coverage moving forward. You would have to project that he's good in coverage for me to want to take a linebacker off ball who's not impacting as a pass rusher off the edge that high in the draft with these guys on the board. Like, if all these guys are off the board, then I start to get more interested in Micah Parsons, because I'd rather take Micah Parsons than an edge if the off-field stuff checks out, of course.
Yeah, the thing about Parsons, too, he has all the tools to be good in coverage, but just because you have all the tools doesn't make you a good plumber. I think that was a Vic Fangio quote.
I like that.
So, I mean, he has all those tools, but can he put it all together? From what you see on film, I mean, he was just such a better athlete than a lot of the tight ends that he was going against, but the NFL is not going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single Big Ten tight end who's even going to get drafted if I'm not. Or besides, I'm sorry, Pat Freiermuth.
Obviously, Freiermuth.
But Freiermuth is not that type of tight end. Like, you watch
Freiermuth.
Yeah, he's on his team, so it's not like he's facing him. But either way, besides Freiermuth, I don't think there's going to be a single one that's going to be comparable. So who knows there. Step 2, trade. This would be my second step. Trade back from 42. This would be the pick to do it that I want to do it at, to acquire more picks. Now, the reason I said this, I said it won't be easy. Something could happen like last year where somebody like Xavier McKinney, who you have a clear-cut first-round grade on, falls into that 42 hole and you just can't help yourself, and I get that. But I also think that it's no coincidence to me that the Giants were able to find their best day 3 values in the 2020 class with Darnay Holmes, Shane Lemieux, and Tay Crowder. And you could throw Darius Slayton from the last lesson, that's fine, but those are 3 of their best. In the 2020 class where they also had their most day 3 picks in the Dave Gettleman era. The draft is an imperfect process. Day 3 picks are statistically nothing more than dart throws. Just by the stats, those day 3 picks, most of the time they don't even make the roster after a year or two, let alone become contributors. So the best chance you have to hit a bullseye is to throw more darts at that bullseye. As it currently stands, the Giants only have 3 total picks on day 3. The only way to get more picks is to trade back really from 11 or 42, or to trade future picks, which they've kind of said they don't really want to do, or maybe an Ingram type trade, which we don't know or think is going to happen. But if they do trade back from 42, they can get more of these day 3 picks that they lost with the item trade, that they lost with the Williams trade. Because as it stands right now, they pick at 116 overall in round 4, and then they don't pick again until 196 overall. That's 80 picks there where you could find a Shane Lemieux, you could find a Tay Crowder, you could find guys who can be contributors, depth pieces for you. And so for me, that's really important. It's not my first step, because my first step is more important. Like, I don't want to go edge at 11. I don't want to force and reach a pick at 11. But this is almost equally as important to me.
And I can understand why. You got to look at the opportunity cost. So we don't want to trade back at 11 because there's realistically going to be a blue chip prospect there.
Sure.
So you look at the 42nd pick. Who's going to be available there? We're looking at guys like Joseph Asai, looking at edges, maybe Ola, Jason Ola, possibly, probably not, but who knows, just because he's a freak, somebody could select him. There's other interior offensive linemen that you may like, but nobody obviously is as talented or can have the impact that 11th pick theoretically should have. So if you do trade back, you can give yourselves more kicks at the can at some of these other positions that we would like to add talent towards. Specifically, I think you could throw tight end in there, but more so the interior offensive line. And that's something that we really want to target, maybe the linebacker position, cornerback as well. Guys like Asante Samuel Jr. could be around if they decide to fall, players like that. And I'm just a big believer in, like you said, adding more of those early day 3 picks, maybe even late day 2 if you do decide to trade back there. It depends on who's on the board, obviously. I'm trying to think of a player that would be on the board where I'd be like, no, you got to run that up to the podium. And the guys who come to my mind are these edge rushers that I don't believe would be there for that 42nd pick, like an Azeez Ojulari, which I feel like is a stretch. You do some of these mock draft simulators, and Jalen Phillips is sitting there, and it's like, yes, the medicals could, but like his talent suggests that a team is going to take a risk. A good football team would take that risk.
I feel a little differently than you. I think on the top of this edge class, I personally don't subscribe to any of them being really great values, except for maybe Phillips. Azeez would be a nice fit systematically for the Giants, but like if you're going to say like Azeez Ojulari versus Elijah Moore, I think Elijah Moore is clearly a better pick. I think just from a BPA value standpoint, you're clearly getting a more sure thing there with a guy versus Azeez Ojulari. I think can be good, but he may end up ultimately being just a situational pass rusher if things don't work out for him. I think it's at least possible and within the realm of possibilities. With Elijah Moore, I see almost no shot of him failing, and he could be there at 42 based on the fact he's only 5'9". If Elijah Moore's there at 42 and they didn't go receiver, they went Rashawn Slater or an edge at 11, then that's the type of player I have to like look at it again and be like, well, I don't really want to make this trade now, do I? Like, do I want to lose out on Elijah Moore, especially after they pass on receiver already? So I don't know. That could be a player for me that would make me kind of reconsider that for sure.
Yeah, and Elijah Moore's an absolute stud, so you're not going to see me arguing too much against him.
And same thing for maybe like a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who we've gone over in the past, who I really like. But even him, I'd probably trade back for. I think it would have to be somebody who I think is a top 15, 20 overall player, and that's going to be rare for me at that pick.
Yeah, and Jock, man, he's somebody who I could see going in like some 15 to like 25 too.
I think his range is like 15 to 45. I think he's got a deep range.
Yeah. I
Just
mean,
because it's just when those tweener types, it's kind of just dependent on the coordinator and like what the plan is on defense. So moving on, step 3, I said this is not the class to skip out on the offensive line. And so, obviously I said in order to break down the current projected offensive line, I think it's important to take a step back. The Giants ranked 31st in pass protection in 2020 per Pro Football Focus. No quarterback other than Sam Darnold on the expansion SGS roster, as I wrote, and I believe that. It was basically a really bad roster last year, was pressured more on a per snap basis than Daniel Jones. Only Darnold was. This offseason, they cut their most experienced and honestly in 2020 their most consistent offensive line with the exception of maybe Nick Gates. So far, they've replaced him with Zach Fulton, who allowed double-digit sacks in 2020. So to me, if you roll into the line with second-year players like Thomas, Lemieux, Matt Pert, you are really expecting a lot of development in a short period of time. It's possible. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but it's a risk based on that. When you add that to the fact that Will Hernandez will be converting to a new position, when you add that to the fact that this is a really, really deep interior offensive line class at the top, not necessarily as it rolls forward later into the draft, but at that early in that day 2 range and maybe into the very beginning of day 3, but probably closer to that day 2, round 3 range. I think it's loaded. I think there's a lot of guys who you could take and say, this is the best player available. We're not just taking because we need to help our offensive line. We're taking the best player available. So some guys I named, and then you can tell me what you think about this, is round 2, Alabama's Landon Dickerson, Oklahoma's Creed Humphrey, Alabama's Alex Leatherwood, North Dakota State's Dylan Redunz, Stanford's Walker Little, Wisconsin Whitewater's Quinn Miners, and then for round 3, I should say, Notre Dame's Liam Eichenberg, though I think some people think he might be a round 2 guy, Illinois' Kendrick Green, Notre Dame's Aaron Banks, and BYU's Brady Christensen.
No, yeah, I like these players, to be honest. I mean, I'm not as high on Dylan Redunz and Alex Leatherwood for the, he's going to be selected in the top 25 type of camp, but, sitting there saying that in the second round, I think it's much more of a digestible conversation to have. But like we always say, man, and we brought this up on this podcast, development's not always linear. Just because a player who's in his rookie season starts off doing well doesn't mean that he's going to continue that trajectory, and we have someone on this roster that we're trying to rely on right now that fits that mold very well, and that is Will Hernandez.
Right.
Will Hernandez, solid 2018, played pretty well. We had a lot of, okay, this guy's a player. 2019 fell off, 2020 was not playing well, got COVID, and then he was just basically, once he got healthy and back into the lineup, was benched for Shane Lemieux.
Yes.
So that could easily happen to Shane Lemieux. That could happen to Matt Parrott. That could happen to Andrew Thomas. So that's why I think it's just so necessary. This could be one of the most important steps on this whole thing, is to find some help at the interior offensive line, find some help at swing positions for guard tackle. And some of these players on the list definitely fit.
I love that you said that. I love that you said it could be not skipping on this offensive line class could be one of the most important steps this team takes in the draft, because I completely agree with you there, Nick. I think a lot of people are right now thinking about this draft and thinking about what the Giants are going to do, and they're okay potentially with skipping on offensive line. They're okay going. I've seen some mocks from a lot of different people and fans and analysts who basically in those first 4 picks have receivers, edges, and corners, receivers, edges, and linebackers, and two receivers and an edge, 2 edges and a receiver, and just completely skip on the offensive line. And I think me and you both agree that would be a massive mistake for this team. And there's no such thing as burying a guy on the depth chart or drafting over someone. What you're doing is you're adding competition. You're adding depth in case of injuries. You're adding talent to a position group that needs talent at all times, and like we've talked about in the past, can't afford to have a deficiency by any means. Like if Shane Lemieux comes out there again and gives what he gave in pass protection in 2020 as a rookie, which we hope won't happen. We hope there's, like you said, we hope the progression is linear to the point where it gets better. But if he does that and we watch it on tape in the first 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about, me and you we're going to be talking about who can replace him. Because that's the general fact of the matter. Will he get benched, and should he get benched, and who can bench him? And what you need in that scenario, if it does fail, you need someone viable to put in. It can't be Zach Fulton. You can't say, let's try Zach Fulton there. Because Zach Fulton's not going to be better than Shane Lemieux.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of what it is. I don't think you can just guarantee this Lemieux-Hernandez thing, either of them, really. And Hernandez, I have more faith in still, even trying a new position. Because at least you watch him in pass pro, and it looks like he's ready every time. He gets his hands up, he gets into his stance, and you rarely see him beat the same way as Lemieux gets beat in pass pro. And I still remain extremely concerned with Shane Lemieux. I'm not as high on him as most Giants fans seem to be.
It all comes down to that base run play, that counter Trey run play.
They
like to
him
run. They
yeah.
like Lemieux a lot on those plays.
You can't counter Trey your way to a Super Bowl, though.
No.
You know, you can't call counter Trey runs away to the Super Bowl. It's nice to have a good run game that has a really good play that works in it, but you gotta have pass protection. You have to have it to have any chance. You can't. 31st in the NFL, no shot to win.
And another thing too is look at the offensive line from 2020. What were they? 31st ranked by a lot of PFF metrics.
Yeah.
And if you watch the tape, you could tell they're not a good offensive line.
Right.
They were pretty healthy, and they just lost their best, most experienced guy. That's a lot of uncertainty, man. That's a lot of uncertainty. You added these nice shiny toys. You get that beautiful shiny toy, Saquon Barkley, back. But if you can't block for them, then what good are they?
Right. It's a good point. They were healthy, and that a bit scary as well. But let's move on to step 4. And this is my favorite. I know everybody's going to hate this one. Don't force a pick at edge. I will be more than happy if they not happy, but I will be totally fine if they come out of this draft without a single edge rusher. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about? That means that instead of taking the edge, they took what they consider to be the best player available. Last year, let's say they forced an edge in the 4th round. Then we wouldn't have Darnay Holmes on the roster right now. Let's say they looked at it and they said, we signed Bradbury, we got Beal coming back, we got this and that and that. We don't need a corner right now. We don't need this position. Let's not draft Holmes. Well, then you lose a quality player in Holmes by trying to take some project edge. Let's look at the 4th round edges from last year. I'm sure none of them
Try to
made
pull
an
them
impact.
up, to be honest.
And then that edge class was better than this edge class. This edge class is worse than last year's edge class. This is a really bad edge class. I mean, we had John Ledyard on the podcast last week, and he broke down the edge class and basically said this is one of the worst edge classes. He said he doesn't have more than a 3rd round grade on any of these guys. So I don't need to force a pick at edge. Is it going to be tough to go into a season with Lorenzo Carter, Shane Zimenez, Odingambo, I'm never going to learn how to pronounce right, and Ryan Anderson? Yeah, maybe, but you also have Cam Brown, you also have Carter Coughlin, you also have a defensive coordinator who's kind of devalued the importance of just having those clear-cut edge guys. And so to me, to force a pick based on need is generally a very disastrous path to take. As I wrote in the article, the Giants finished 12th with 40 sacks last year, despite having injuries to Kyler Fackrell, Shane Zimenez, Lorenzo Carter, who could all be healthy this year, and despite having to literally play plotting inside linebacker David Mayo on the edge for a few snaps, some of the worst snaps we saw by any player on the Giants roster on All-22.
Devontae Downs has something to say about that.
Yeah, that's a good point in 2020. And I also added that Graham's system this year, now that they have added Adoree Jackson to the roster, Graham's system this year could be more man-heavy, could be more blitz-heavy. And if that's the case, and they are using more blitzes, they won't need to rely on as many one-on-one wins from these edge guys because they're using more guys that come from different angles and different spots. So with all that factored in, I really don't think they should force a pick at edge.
I would like them to draft an edge, but
I'd love them to too. Yeah,
I agree that it shouldn't be necessarily forced. Like I like the Darnay Holmes pick over the next 3 edges that were drafted. DJ Wanham, I feel like he is a solid player, incredible length, good pass rusher, has a little bit of bend. Kid from South Carolina, he was T.J. Brunson's teammate. Was also Syracuse's Alton Robinson, who had I want to say like 4 sacks last year, which is pretty good for a 4th round rookie. Turns out to be a solid player, maybe a little bit more of a 4-3 guy than a 3-4 guy. If we're going to get nitpicky here with that type of stuff.
Sure.
But I'm looking at these edge guys. I mean, I'm trying to think of people later in the draft that the Giants may be interested in. And I think of someone like Dayo Odinigbo. Now, that would be really, really interesting to get him, but he's somebody who tore his ACL and is not going to play. Tore it in the pre-draft process.
Right.
He's going to have a redshirt year, but I think he's a solid player. And then you got guys like Jonathan Cooper out of Ohio State, Elisha Smith out of Northern Iowa, who I find very intriguing, but somebody who may struggle to play the run. Didn't play in 2020, looked really good at the Senior Bowl. 2019 tape, he was an electric pass rusher, but he was going up against accountants and dudes who like do your taxes and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I could see where you're coming from. Personally, though, I would like to definitely add bodies to that edge.
Yeah. I think a perfect world, I'd like to add bodies. My step is not don't pick any edges.
Absolutely.
I want to make that clear. I want them to draft an edge if there's a good value edge at any point.
Absolutely.
I would consider Peyton Turner a good value to take, a good gamble to take. I'd take Jason, like you said, Azeez Ojulari. If you can get him at 42, snap it off. I'm fine with that. You can get Jason O at 42, fine. I'm good with that. But if you're in the process of forcing like a Joe Tryon at 42 because you need an edge, that's when you start to get me. And I'll be honest, even at 11, if you're taking Azeez Ojulari over Devontae Smith, over maybe Rashawn Slater, that's when you start to get into the range of where I'm not going to be supporting.
And I agree with that.
And then my fifth and final step would be don't be afraid to double dip at wide receiver. If I was asked to make a prediction now, I predict the Giants will end up with Waddle, Smith, or Pitts after day one. And just because they do that doesn't mean they have to avoid the positions later in the draft. This is a deep and talented wide receiver class. More importantly, they still don't know for sure if Darius Slayton's going to be a part of their future, so it's always good to get more depth at wide receiver. They don't know for sure if Sterling Shepard's going to be part of their future because he's been injury prone, he has concussions, and they can recoup some dead cap space if they release him. Or I'm sorry, they can recoup some cap space with a limited dead cap hit if they release him in the next 2 off seasons. So with that said, players like Josh Palmer, who's my favorite player in this entire draft, my best case scenario is to open round 4 with this player. I think it would be like a Darnay Holmes, better than Darnay Holmes type value pick. Tennessee's Josh Palmer, that is. Iowa's Amir Smith-Marset is on my list. Louisville's Tutu Atwell, who I just started watching a little bit of more recently because Scott Barrett turned me on to him. His model loves him. Thinks he could be a breakout player. And then Simi Fuyoku out of Stanford, who I like, who I think they can get in round 6. I think they can get him real deep. And then Western Michigan's Dwayne Eskridge, round 4. Auburn's Seth Williams, who I think has really good skills at the catch point. Maybe not everything else to his game, but has that. Auburn's Anthony Schwartz, who I think has some intriguing traits. He's not really a fully developed player. Wake Forest Sage Surratt. Clemson's Amari Rogers. It's a deep list. South Carolina's Shi Smith interests me. Even North Carolina's Daz Newsome. I've seen some stuff from him that interests me. So really, there are a lot of guys I like. And if they go again at wide receiver in round 3, on day 3, I'll be happy.
Yeah, and I also think Austin Watkins from UAB, he could be thrown on that list. Not a dynamic athlete, but was a very effective vertical threat who understands the nuances of running routes. I was actually really impressed with his route running ability, and I felt like he went to the Senior Bowl and he got lost amongst like Frank Darby and obviously Dwayne Eskridge and all these other receivers who were kind of dynamic down there. But just watching his one-on-one films, you're like, I was really talking about this guy, but this guy's a pretty solid player. I think he's Sammy Watkins' cousin as well, which is just cool.
Nice, yeah.
Nice little throw thing. And then Diami Brown, I think, is a little bit too good to make that list because he's probably going to be a late date or a late second round pick. But he's definitely somebody to pay attention to as well. Did you have Tylan Wallace on the list?
I didn't have Tylan Wallace. I've soured a little on Tylan Wallace a bit. I liked his tape, and I love watching him. Yeah. The injuries concern me. I guess that shouldn't be too much of a concern if he can kind of get... It just seems like he kind of profiles to me as someone who might have that issue.
I can understand why people are concerned about him. Yeah. A, you have the injuries. B, he's like a 5'10", teetering on 5'11", 195-pound guy who wins like a 6'4"
guy.
Yes,
he does.
And that doesn't always translate as well, but you watch some of his catches, man, that takes in a unique amount of concentration and body control. And I know he was playing in the Big 12, not facing some of the top level cornerbacks or anything like that.
Facing a lot of off coverage.
Facing a lot of off coverage. But still, man, he was pretty impressive. For later in the, I would put him in that list.
Sure, I think that's fair.
I like him better than some of these receivers that are probably in that list. I do love Amari Rogers, though. That's somebody who could be like a nice little Swiss Army knife for an offense, man.
Sure.
You could line him up at running back, give him the football. He's low to the ground. He's an interesting player.
I really like him as well, too. Yep. I think he'd be really good for the offense. So that's it. That's the 5-step plan. Just to go over them real quick before we sign off here. We got 1, take the blue chip player at 11. Don't hesitate. Don't force a pick. Don't reach for a need. Step 2, trade back from 42. Acquire more picks. Don't leave yourself 80 picks apart from having a draft pick on day 3. Step 3, not the class to skip out on the offensive line. Too talented, too deep, too important. Step 4, don't force a pick at edge. Take one if there's a good value, but do not force one. Do not be afraid to come out of this class without a highly picked edge. And then 5, don't be afraid to double dip a receiver.
Oh, and also, one other thing we have to, I'd be remiss not to bring it up. It's the pitcher that is chosen for this article. It's awesome. Jalen Waddle just looking like a pure badass, breaking angles, probably breaking ankles as well, running. The entire Alabama staff is just like, oh, wow, this is about to happen. So I think that's a really cool picture.
Yeah, it's an awesome picture. Jalen Waddle, is he explosive and electric.
He's very fun. He's very fun.
All right, have a good one, guys. We will talk to you soon and see you on the next one of these Big Blue Banter YouTube videos.